big barn. She heaved open the double doors on the barn and strode in across the wooden floor to a big covered shape in one of the corners of the big barn. It had a tarp over it. And she looked at the tarp, and it was a little askew, a little bit different than she had left it the day before when she had put it over whatever it was that was under it. And she said, "Oh." And she turned her head to the open barn door, and she could see through to the kind of the stately farmhouse that was beyond it. And she said, "Boo! Boo! I told you to leave my aeroplane alone." Oh, she muttered to herself, that sister of mine could break something, and I don't know how to fix it. So then she got over that. She started pulling the tarp off the aeroplane. She stepped back, put her hands on her hips, and put her head back as if to get a more expansive view of the plane. It was her pride and joy. This was her most prized possession. She looked at it, she smiled, and she went up to one part and she kind of shook the plane a little bit, gave it a shove. It didn't move it very much, and then she listened inside and heard a sloshing, and she said, "Yeah, there's enough fuel in there. I'm going flying today." So she went up to the plane and she put her foot up on the bottom wing and held onto one of the support rods, and she hoisted herself up into one of the two openings on the top, the pilot seat. She crawled in, and the opening wasn't very big, but there was room underneath. And once she got in, she had plenty of room to stretch out her legs. And she sat there and she looked in front of her, and all the controls and gadgets and levers and buttons and dials. A lot of them she didn't know what to do with. She'd only had one quick lesson on how to run this flying machine. That wasn't stopping her. She had sat many times here in this barn, just sat there looking and studying them, figuring out what they were for. She was ready to give it a run today. And then she fished around on the floor for something, and she pulled up a leather cap that she put on her head and a pair of goggles that she put on her head up here. Then she fished in her pocket, and she pulled out a key, a little key, and she put it into a keyhole, and she turned it, and the engine started going. It started rumbling. It was loud. She got a big smile on her face. She put her goggles down on her eyes. She gave it some fuel, and the plane started to move across the wooden floor. And it was almost facing the double door anyway, but she steered it so that she went through, and there was just a little bit of space on either side of the wing as it cleared the door. She said, "Yes." The plane started going, and she was giving it more fuel, more fuel, more fuel. And it was going faster. It was going along, and she had steered it into a pasture, a fairly flat pasture. And it was bouncing a little because it wasn't like it was paved or anything. It was just flat ground. And it was bouncing, and going faster and faster and faster and rolling faster. And she was enjoying watching the scenery just whiz by, just going by. And then she noticed, oh yeah, there's the fence up there. I better do something. So she pulled up, and the wheels bounced, and left the ground. And she was flying. The plane, it dipped, and it rose, and it fell, and it rose, and it fell, as she was getting used to how to make this plane work. She'd only flown it by herself once before. She was flying. Going, the sound, the wind, and she started getting going, and it started going, and she was at a 45-degree angle finally, and she was climbing, and she said, "Yeehaw!" So she was flying and loving it. You see, she was 20 years old, but she was still the daughter of a preacher with no mother, and she was still at home taking care of her sister, taking care of her father. But she yearned for a life of her own, and while she was up here, she had a life of her own. What was that? That better not be. And she started to turn around, and out of the back passenger compartment, up popped Boo, her sister. "Surprise, it's me," she said. She'd been hiding down in the leg compartment of the passenger seat. She said, "Surprise, it's me." Ah. Esmeralda was so exasperated. She turned, she jerked around in her seat. She was going to give Boo a good talking to. But as she did, her knee smashed against a control on the underside of the compartment. The control she didn't know was there. It was half hidden. But as soon as she hit it, it was like someone turned the lights out. It was black. Inky black. Sky. She couldn't even see the steering wheel in front of her. And the wind stopped. It was as if the plane had just come to a sudden halt. But she could still hear the engine rumbling. It hadn't fallen. It was just dark. "Boo, are you there? I'm here. Isn't this fun?" "Oh, you'll think fun. Look, did you see storms? There were no storms. It was a blue sky. What happened?" And then the plane dove. And her stomach went up. And her heart went up. And her fears went up. Oh my gosh. Took the steering wheel, and she tried to pull it up because she knew that would make the nose come up. But it was fighting her, and they were diving, and she knew they hadn't been that far in the sky, and if they fell much further, they were going to crash. She just knew it. And she tried. And then the wheel jerked out of her hands. And the plane seemed to start to take over for itself. And it evened out. And they were flying straight again. Not through anything that Esmeralda was doing. The plane was flying itself. She didn't know it could do that. And then she thought about Boo. Boo might not have been strapped in. "Boo?" No answer. "Boo, oh no, she could have flown it." "I'm having the best time," she said. "I'm having the best time. This is fun." And she thought, well, maybe I hit my head or something and I can't see because I've been blinded. "Boo, can you see anything?" "No, Az, it's dark." "Oh, is this not normal?" "Of course it's not normal. We have no light. In the middle of the day, the plane is flying itself. This is not normal. I hope you're having fun now." "I am." "I am." She didn't know what else to do. She couldn't change the plane's flying. It was doing it itself. They couldn't go anywhere. They were up in the air, so they just sat in silence. The only sound was the rumble of the engine. They sat like that for quite some time. And then Boo said, "Look, up there! I see some light!" And there, far in the distance, was a little round bit of light. It looked about as big as the moon does when it's at its highest in the sky. And they were going right toward it. And it got closer, very fast. Now bigger and bigger and bigger until it filled up everything they could see, and they had to squint their eyes because their eyes had become accustomed to the dark. They didn't even have time to worry about is this good, is this bad, and all of a sudden they plunged through the light, and it was like diving into a vertical lake. And the wind came back. It sucked the air out of their lungs for a moment. And it was loud, the wind was back, and the plane dove again. It had stopped flying itself. And so Esmeralda took the wheel and she pulled it. This time it responded to her, and the nose came up, and they were flying even again. And when Esmeralda had caught her breath, she looked around, and the lush, rolling farmland she expected to see beneath her was not there. It was brown and dry and rocky and sandy and dirty. And there was one river winding through the desert, and along there green vegetation grew, but otherwise it was all dead and rocks. And then the plane sputtered, and the engine hiccuped, and she said, "Oh no." She looked around for a place to land, and it was all hilly and rocky and no good place to try landing. And then she noticed a worn path that was running pretty much parallel to the river. And she said, that's it, there. She brought the plane down, 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 and the wheels bounced and bounced and bounced, and then stayed on the ground and rolled fast, 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 but slower and slower, until the plane stopped and the engine died. Just in time. Can we do that again? No. Boo was already crawling out of her spot and jumping down to the ground. And Ez couldn't stay mad. Esmeralda couldn't stay mad at Boo for very long. She too climbed out of the plane and what are we going to do? What are we going to do, Ez? I'll tell you what we're going to do, she said, walking around the other side of the plane from where she had gotten down, fishing a pocket knife out of her pocket. And she came up to a 2x2 panel that was on the side of the plane, and she pulled out the screwdriver part of the pocket knife, and she started applying some pressure to it. Pried the metal panel off the side, threw it on the ground, and looked inside. And it was a mess of wires and metal plates and things made of things she didn't know what they were. And some of the metal plates had glowing numbers and letters on them, and some of the metal plates had lines etched on them in patterns. And in the middle was a sphere that was glowing and red and throbbing. She stuck her head in, and she reached down and she pulled out a tattered booklet that was about this thick, about 3/4 of an inch thick. It was well worn, obviously, had seen a lot of people paging through it, had been through a lot. And she looked at the cover and it said, there was a picture of her plane on it, and it said, Professor Elijah's Time Machine. So she walked over to a rock that was in the shade, sat down, and started flipping through it and reading it. And she read that tattered book from cover to cover, and then she started at the beginning and she read all the way through again. And Esmeralda got up off the rock, walked back over to the plane, and she said, Boo, it appears we've gone time travel. Now look at those numbers there on that plate. See, it says minus 539. You know what that means? No. It means we're in the year 539 BC. We are 2,000 years from home. The book said that the time machine takes us places too. So let's look in here, and on there was a plate with some numbers, some coordinates. And she opened up the book to a place where there was a map that ran over several pages, and it had lines crisscrossing through it. And she found the place on the grid right where that corresponded to the numbers in the plane, and she goes, Ooh, look, we're right here. We looked at it and said, yes. She said, well, what does that mean to you? Why are you excited about that? We're in Asia. And we said, no, don't you remember from Bible study with Papa? We're in Babylon. Babylon. What? Wow. And as they just looked at the map and were looking around on the side of the plane where they stood, and they didn't notice a man started walking up along the path using a walking stick. He seemed kind of weary, but also kind of excited, like he was in a hurry to get somewhere. And he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the plane. What is that? And then he walked a little faster to get closer to it, and then stopped like he thought better of the idea. And his curiosity got the best of him, and he walked a little closer, and then he stopped still because he heard voices. 2 voices, female. He couldn't understand the language they were speaking. He said, who is that? Who's there? Esmeralda and Boo, who had not been paying attention, jumped. Oh no, what are we going to do? Who are you? what is this thing? Boo said, what is he saying? Esmeralda said, I don't know, but I know how to find out. And she fished back down in the compartment and felt around until she pulled out a little leather satchel. And inside of it, she pulled out a little round button-like thing that had a pin in the back. So the book, she said, Boo, the book says that as long as we use this, we'll be able to understand what people say, and people will understand what we say. So she pinned that next to her. She said, now you stay close to me. And they cautiously walked around to the front of the plane where the man was and said, hello? And the man thought, oh, now they're talking my language. I can understand them. Who are you? What are you women doing out here? Where is your man? Why are you out here? What is this thing? And Esmeralda said, well, sir, we're travelers, and this is our chariot. This is very strange, he said. That's a strange chariot, and these are very strange clothes you're wearing. And he knew that he shouldn't be talking to two unaccompanied women whom he did not know. There were rules about that sort of thing. But he was very intrigued by what he saw. Very intrigued. And here was a man who had taken chances all of his life, and he was going to take another one. And he walked up to them and he said, my name is Isaiah. A little while later, they were sitting around the fire that he had started for them and trying to get to know one another cautiously. Both of them with suspicions, both of them with worries about what this might mean. And Boo asked Isaiah, have you been on a journey? He had a pack with him. He had a walking stick. He was very dirty from the road. It was a good assumption. And he said, yes, I have. I have been out in the wilderness for several days talking with God. And Esmeralda said, not with a bit of not any sarcasm, she said, and did God talk back? And he said, yes. God told me that there are good times ahead for my people. He said, let me explain. My people are not here in this land of our own choice. Many years ago, the king of this land, of Babylon, came to our country and defeated us in a war. It was awful. They destroyed our cities. They wrecked our temple. And then they forced many of us, most of us, to march across the desert to this place. To resettle here to be nothing more than slaves. It was very hard and very demeaning. We had no rights here. We were conquered people. We are conquered people. And it's been very hard for some of us, for many of us. Some of us, in the years since, it's been many, many years. Some of us have risen up in society. We've become businessmen or learned a trade. And many of us are laborers and servants for the Babylonians. We've been here so long, it feels like it's the only home we've ever known. But it's not our home. Our home is the promised land, the land that our God led us to centuries ago. We've just forgotten it. My people have forgotten it. They've become so low on themselves. They've forgotten our God Yahweh. They've forgotten what God has done for us. All they can remember is our defeat, and they think that either God let us be defeated and enslaved as punishment for something, or they believe that the Babylonian gods defeated our God, just the way the Babylonians defeated us. They know, they've been taught our traditions and our laws. And we follow them, but not because we love God, just because we know how to follow rules. But God has told me that it's going to be different now. God has told me that we get to go back to our home. God has told me that it won't be long until we are free. You see, Babylon is at war with another country right now, with Persia. And it's just a matter, they're doing very badly. And it's just a matter of time before they're overrun. And God told me that the king of Persia is going to let us go back home. And God told me my task is to persuade people to go. Some of us are comfortable here. Even when we're servants and laborers, most of us are comfortable here. This is home. Why would we leave? This is where we grew up. We were born here. We grew up here. Our ancestors who came from our land are gone, long gone. So it's my task to convince them that this is a good idea, to go back to a land that's wrecked, where the fields have gone sour, where the cities are in ruin, and to rebuild a temple to our God, who they think has abandoned us. But God hasn't abandoned us. God told me, and He showed me how God was with us through that march through the desert. God was with us. God has been with us every day since we've been here, watching over us and loving us. God cares about us. And now God wants to be with us as we march back through the desert to go back home. And God will protect us because God has a mighty arm. And yet God is also tender. God is like a shepherd to us, and we are the sheep. And God will protect us and carry us when we need to be carried. This is what God has told me, and this is what I need to go back and tell my people. And he'd been talking for some time, and Boo had fallen asleep, and she was leaning against Esmeralda. Esmeralda eased her down and laid her on the ground in as comfortable position as she could manage. And she said, "Sir, thank you. I'm tired too, and tomorrow I have to figure out how to get us home. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go to sleep myself." And he said that would be fine. And he would go stand watch. And Esmeralda lay down on the ground, and her eyes got heavy, and she thought about this God that is concerned with nations in war and entire civilizations and people, and how this God also cares about her, and how this God is with her now, even in this predicament that she found herself in, and that God cared about her. She was like a blade of grass as far as the world goes. She is impermanent. She will wither and die someday. And yet God loves her, like every blade of grass. And she smiled and thought, I'm not so scared anymore. God's with us. We'll find a way. And she drifted off to sleep. And sometime later, as the sun was just starting to break the horizon, the sound of metal clanking startled her awake, and she sat up and she saw the plane. And she got up and she ran over to where the plane was, and she looked around, and everything seemed okay. She could smell fuel though. And then she walked around to where the compartment with the time machine in it, and someone had screwed the plate back in place. And tucked into a crevice of that was a note folded up. And she pulled it out and she unfolded it, and all it said on it was, "Go."